As the sun rose on the morning of March 23, 2001, the wrestling world had no idea that the landscape of the business would be altered and changed forever. But while WCW was tumbling around in late 2000, nobody envisioned the World Wrestling Federation to actually purchase them. It seemed unfathomable and far-fetched. Their original offer in November of 2000 was scoffed at, yet now the WWF bought them way under market value, all because Time Warner didn't care about working on it. WCW lost a lot of money with Time Warner. The new execs didn't see a future for professional wrestling on their stations, and like vultures, the WWF were there to strike. And the purchase itself was very odd and sudden. It almost felt like a fake dream, but right before the biggest Wrestlemania in company history, their former enemy and rival was now under their control. This was very damaging to the wrestling world and the WWF itself, because without competition, it brought complacency and an unknown future. WWF's hype was always going to die down eventually, but buying WCW accelerated that. 3 million fans disappeared overnight, and that's the thing. If WWE went under today, those fans wouldn't just magically convert into AEW or TNA fans. Some of them would, but there's a reason why those fans stuck with WCW throughout the final days. Because while they changed tremendously, they still had an identity that WWF didn't have. Later that week was WrestleMania 17. WrestleMania in Houston was a mega success and a show that ranks amongst the greatest in wrestling history. It's the best wrestling event ever, and that to me is because of the narratives and hype leading up to the show itself. Those narratives are the reason why years from now I'm still going to consider it the best show ever. But the ending also produced a huge mistake in wrestling history: the Austin heel turn. Zero competition allowed for WWF to do whatever they wanted, but this is very far out and very risky, seeing as the night of the heel turn, Austin was loved and adored in Texas. The Rock was actually booed, and obviously you're not going to run back the WrestleMania 15 storyline and doing a Rock heel turn, but the WWF would have been better served having Austin solely become a heel rather than do it straight up and have him aligned with his lifelong enemy. The WWF as a whole was transformed with these changes to the industry. The shows felt slower than usual and didn't showcase the roster as strongly as they did in 2000. Yet when you look at 2001 from a distance, it was still a massive opportunity for the WWF to further cement themselves as the leader of pro wrestling. The Invasion followed up. A dream storyline to many was about to come to fruition. With the purchase of WCW, many wrestlers' contracts were bought out, and this meant that the roster would grow beyond what the company was ever used to. In the meantime, there wasn't much beyond the two-man power trip at the WWF. It almost felt like they were buying time. There was also the first season of XFL at the time, and a part of Vince McMahon's attention was placed on the Football League. He wanted to air the games on national television. NBC did initially, but backed off, and UPN did accept airing the games, but that meant that SmackDown would have to be cut half an hour, and that would have been too much to invest in a doubtful idea. SmackDown at the time served a great purpose of continuing stories told on Raw, and also featured some great matches you wouldn't get the chance to see on Raw. Like, just think about it. They randomly threw TLC 3 on SmackDown. Absolute insanity. And just a side note, for as much as you might dislike 2001 WWF, it's always a good time for me to go back to, because you could hate on the Invasion or the fact that the feeling is different, but on every show, you'd see at least one good competitive match. XFL failed miserably, who would have thought that, and the attention shifted back to the WWF. The product itself was the coldest it had been in years, and some of these issues were out of WWF's hand. Wrestling just wasn't cool anymore. They played a part in facilitating that by having Stephanie McMahon with zero experience run the show near the end of 2000. What does Stephanie know about booking? I mean, I liked some of the stories involving her, but this is one of the small changes that altered the way the WWF was. But for as much as I could talk about that change, the WWF was always gonna fall off. The Rock left right when the problem came because of his movie appearance in The Scorpion King, and a huge reason why WWF fell was because of how nobody was there to combat Austin's heel turn. The one guy they had was missing for 4 months. So you're left in a company with a top heel, and when you look at past trends with the WWF itself, the World Wrestling Federation, we're not talking about the NWA, WCW, any of that. This is uncharted waters. We could look at Roman Reigns' heel turn 20 years later, but that's a huge anomaly in the company's history, because the last time they did it, Triple H put many to sleep with his reign of dominance. Raw was Triple H's playground, and there was a then record channel changing number to his run. You see Booker T on the measuring stick Jericho, the game, you guys know what Triple H was talking about. That's not this video. With Stone Cold, he was the right guy, but in the wrong role. And to be a little more positive on Triple H, and by the way, I'm not trying to be Make-A-Wish and be positive for the sake of it, because I don't exactly believe in that. His story with Austin was one of the big stories of the summer, but then he got hurt and disappeared for 8 months. The mid-card didn't have much to it, honestly, and it lacked the fire that it had in previous years. Kurt Angle had this great feud with Chris Benoit at the time, and to understand how weird things were, the lightweight championship scene was more interesting than the Intercontinental Intercontinental Championship scene. Albert had a run nobody remembers, and it's so weird to say that he beat Kane for the title. This version of Kane prime Kane to some, certainly to me. This specimen was losing to the second guy in a faction led by 2001 X-Pac. The lightweight division had the likes of Christian, Eddie Guerrero, the Hardys, and Tajiri around, but there was one particular story that did stand out like crazy. Shane McMahon and Kurt Angle. A rich kid getting on the nerves of a professional athlete, and on paper, Shane's supposed to be the heel, but he's not. He's talking about this WCW return for weeks, and Kurt Angle was treated like a side quest. Angle was hot on his heels, and one thing I love about this feud is that they did everything from Amir's perspective. Instead of the heel running away, it's the face, and Angle ended up having one of his most famous matches in one of my all-time favorite matches. A match that was super grueling and physical, especially for the son of the billionaire. Shane was always 78% towards meeting God on a regular basis, but it always impressed the audience. There's an art with this match that fascinates me. Its visuals just stand out to me. This guy had no business being in a wrestling match, let alone one like this. And I've seen more violent matches, but there's something about this that felt too real. Maybe it's Angle breaking his tailbone, Shane getting belly to belly 2 times, but I always leave with an uncomfortable feeling after this one, as if I actually wrestled in the match. The reason why I gave this match so much time is because there's been better matches in the past and since then, but this one is so controversially good. Angle was run down with this being his 3rd match. Hope he was paid for the 3 matches on pay-per-view, and the other 2 matches were solid, but he left his best performance for last. Shane coming out of it like it took years off his career. There's so much love for this match from me that I really hope you guys understand. It was that damn good. The WWF as a whole was still in a tough place, especially compared to where they were in the build to WrestleMania 17. It was a far cry, but the hidden weapon in their back pocket was just about to be pulled out. King of the Ring 2001 was an important event in the year of 2001. The WWF officially kicked off their highly anticipated Invasion storyline. The Invasion without WWF's own promotion of it was very promising just based on the premise. You had a huge story showcasing the best of the WWF and the best of WCW, although that in itself is highly debated. The story originally saw WCW as a face promotion. Shane was just happy to bring his father some competition, but it morphed into a story that saw Shane and Stephanie grow in hunger and power. WCW had a much bigger presence initially, as this was all supposed to lead to a brand split of sorts. The Invasion, as it turned out, wasn't even close to being the original plan. It was WCW and WWF. WCW would take the Raw brand, and this would come after Vince did a roleplay of his real life and actually get caught. This ended up happening. Linda McMahon divorces him, they split the assets, and Shane gets to run the Raw brand, which would turn out to be a WCW show, probably Nitro. And if you're wondering why WWF would choose the SmackDown brand, well, SmackDown was shown in more homes, and if you were like me as a kid, there was a time the only channel that had wrestling was UPN or the CW network. SmackDown was very established only 2 years into its existence, but then the WWF fans didn't want WCW, which makes sense because a lot of WCW fans would think the same thing, and the plans were scrapped. Instead, they brought in ECW to make the WWF look very weak and wounded. The Invasion had plenty of issues, but the fan interest was high. The show did mega numbers, 700,000 buys, all to witness the return of the old Stone Cold and possibly some huge developments into the Invasion storyline. The event was good from an in-ring standpoint, but WWF missed the mark again with Stone Cold. The ratings were high in the weeks leading up to the show, and this was mostly because Austin was returning to the good side. And it was this insistence on heel Stone Cold that once again sent the WWF to the shadows. It's not black and white because Austin was the main guy. The WCW guys weren't coming in just yet, so somebody had to turn. But if they went all in on a face Austin, perhaps things would have ended differently. It's no guarantee, but that Invasion show needed a debuting Alliance member. The Invasion was off to a bad start with Austin having to join the Alliance. The undercard was filled with a bunch of title changes, DDP having an underwhelming debut in the tag team division being forgettable, and at its weakest in years. On the positive, The Rock was coming back. It almost felt like The Rock's return was the shot in the arm that the product needed. And this is despite having a full or a half-fledged Invasion story. It's almost like the WWF was chasing anything that was within reach and desperately hoping that it's going to set them free and bring them back to a time like early 2001. There's an organic story told with Kurt Angle. Angle was the red-hot American hero babyface that the world and the WWF needed. Angle was at his hottest and never in his career since then would experience that level of commitment from the WWF. For a short time, he was the #1 guy in the company. He shined the brightest in the Invasion, but if there's one guy that came from out of nowhere during this whole story, it was Rob Van Dam. RVD took the opportunity and ran with it. He easily became one of the most over wrestlers in the company, and it simply comes down to how unique he was. RVD was special, and WWF in another time probably would have struck the best they could with him, but it was a missed chance. I don't think it would have been bad to see RVD with the World Wrestling Federation Championship doing the pose. The final stretch of the Invasion felt like a time where WWF wanted to get it over with and just move on to the next thing. The ratings fell badly, the buy rates were down, attendance was the worst they had been, and it was a few things. WWF's product, 9/11, and the fact that it felt like wrestling's best days were behind them. Because only in the beginning of the year, ECW was primed to push Rob Van Dam to the very top, WCW was about to undergo a reboot, and now the WWF was the only one standing with the only other option for wrestlers being WWA, All Japan Pro Wrestling, and New Japan Pro Wrestling. Those promotions weren't doing too well either, with New Japan about to enter the dark era of Inokiism. WWF was worried about a 3.8 rating on Raw with 800,000 viewers turning off the TV after watching Rock and RVD's match. They figured nothing was gonna top that, and judging by that show, they were most likely right. The WWF was missing a lot of shots, having Kurt Angle join the Alliance, and while there was some good with Jericho and Rock's feud growing with intensity, an amazing Paul Heyman promo to sell Survivor Series, it felt like a stroke of luck rather than deliberate quality content. Survivor Series 2001 proved to be the end of the Invasion storyline, and it was a merciful yet ironic ending, with it being The Rock and Stone Cold battling it out for WWF and WCW. And the best part was that this was going to become a common occurrence with this stacked roster. The WWF found themselves with a huge roster, and this roster needed to be shaped properly because certain acts need to be featured. New ones had to be showcased, and a brand swell was looming. But in the meantime, we got a small time period where all hell was breaking loose. It was a wild west of sorts. The WWF had Undertaker randomly turn heel and force Jarrett to kiss the boss's ass. Test had immunity and just did whatever he wanted, looking like the biggest douche. Trish Stratus would have a bra and panties match almost every week. Stone Cold got retconned into being a face. Ric Flair came back the day he wasn't supposed to, although Charlotte always loved seeing the Nature Boy. The Hardy Boys had the weirdest split and reunion. Everything was chaotic, and I really have a soft spot for this time period. The WWF unified both world titles, those being the then WCW Championship and of course the WWF Championship. You'd expect it to be The Rock or Stone Cold to lay claim to the Undisputed Championship, but it surprisingly ended up being Chris Jericho. And it wasn't undeserving at all. Jericho had done well for all of 2001 and deserved this compensation, although if you asked him about the actual title reign, he just might have thrown those belts down. But wait, you got to meet him at WrestleMania, but as the bitch to a bitch and a bitch. We might be doing too much here. Y2J's run is an odd one, but every once in a while somebody plays the transitional role. You remember how WWF's ratings were falling? They started to mess around a lot around this time period with things. They thought bringing back The Godfather and Goldust would help things, even Val Venus. It was a nostalgia thing, which is unfortunate seeing as WWF had the talent to not feel like it's chasing a high of the past. Triple H was coming back and the hype for his return was unreal. It's so unreal that fans were willing to overlook that this guy was a domestic terrorist. He makes Claude from GTA 3 look merciful. This demon was getting cheered like he was some loved hero, and WWF did it wonderfully. The YouTube Beautiful Day video package really makes you understand the hype of that version of Triple H, and why wouldn't you be excited for your favorite villain? The WWF had yet another chance to try something out and potentially get on the straight path with Triple H's return. On the side, DDP had this smiling gimmick. William Regal was using brass knucks casually like it was as safe as a full Nelson. The tag division was just there, and Stone Cold was once again very popular, with the audience having reinvented himself with the What catchphrase. The What catchphrase was insanity in early 2002. I'll drink one beer. What? 2 beers, what? And it was one of those things that was very interactive. If a wrestler like Austin wants fan involvement, then they're gonna make sure to bring their best. But WWF was all over the place. SmackDown have some crazy stacked main event, with Austin and Rock teaming up against a team like Chris Jericho and The Undertaker. The roster was absolute insanity, and even then they couldn't figure out a way to bring the ratings up. So they brought out one of their last weapons, the New World Order. Mr. McMahon promised to inject a lethal dose of poison to the WWF, all because of the chaos that Ric Flair as a co-owner was causing, and thus the NWO was in the World Wrestling Federation. This was met with plenty of skepticism, seeing as the NWO weren't exactly known for listening and being a part of the locker room. But if it meant that WWF would get some momentum going, then so be it. And even though it sounds like I'm talking bad about this time period, it's from a certain perspective, because you see these megastars and egos all in one company, can't help but think that it didn't fulfill its full potential. Despite that, I really love the post-invasion pre-draft time period. There's some funny and cool moments there. The supermarket brawl, Stone Cold just casually chasing the NWO, which is stupid based on their characters, but as a standalone segment, it's funny. Remember Hogan in disbelief that the limo's destroyed, shouting "what?" which just so happened to be the exact thing he was thinking in his mind, but at the same time it was what was written on the limousine. The matches on SmackDown were high quality and very engaging. The crowds were still hot and into the show, and for some reason after WrestleMania 19, the shows didn't have that level of energy. Early 2002 is just strange. Chris Jericho turning into a secondary world champion, the return of Mr. Perfect, who didn't look too bad, but his presence in 2002 WWF is strange. He still had something there despite his age, but it wasn't going to be much. The hype for WrestleMania X8 wasn't as strong as 17's, although 17 is the best of them all, so it's like, are you really that bad? or is it just the 17s that good? It seemed like the marketing of the show was strongly centered on Hulk Hogan and The Rock. Other than that, when you watch the actual stories unfold, you understand why. The Undisputed Championship match is about a dog when it should have been simply and only centered on Triple H's recovery. I easily understand the premise with Stephanie McMahon being the last roadblock in Triple H's road back to the WWF Championship, but the actual story with Chris Jericho being second fiddle was bad. If she was included, it should have been more of a background thing, but then again, this was Prime McMahon TV, so obviously if her faces are on the screen, it was going to be the biggest on the TV. Chris Jericho did not feel as big of a threat as a WrestleMania main event heel should be, and morale was faltering. A lot of wrestlers took pay cuts because WWF just wanted to. They're paying the NWO all kinds of money, and the loyal guys were getting shafted. But such is life. Their very top guy, Stone Cold Steve Austin, was on the ropes when it comes to the relationship with the World Wrestling Federation. As a performer, Austin was already broken down, but creatively, the WWF didn't offer anything compelling. His opponent Scott Hall was doubtful for WrestleMania, not because of injuries, but because of his own personal issues. And everyone knew that already, but they decided to bring in the NWO anyways. And the alternate options were Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit, and Kevin Nash. The Benoit one was pretty close, but he was unable to make it to the show. Angle's already done on a couple of occasions, and ironically, their best work was in the opposite roles, although WWF didn't give them a great opportunity to do it again. Nash was another easy option, seeing as he was a member of the NWO, but Austin wasn't happy about any of this. His match didn't feel as big as any of his last 3 WrestleMania matches, and Scott Hall probably didn't even know he was facing Stone Cold at the time. But Austin's issues with creative in the WWF would continue to develop. WrestleMania 18 is a night that's ultimately looked at as a success. Not as massive as 17, but 18 had its own charm despite its shortcomings. The Undertaker and Ric Flair having a surprisingly memorable battle, the Hardcore Championship switched out over many moments throughout the night, and while some of the card did look like a regular pay-per-view, the show was salvaged by one of the biggest matches in wrestling history, The Rock vs. Hollywood Hulk Hogan. This match is one of those where it feels like time stands still, and if you ask me, there's only 2 or 3 matches since then that capture that feeling. With The Rock and Hogan, it's the best kind of feeling. The Toronto crowd knew that they were about to witness a classic, but I doubt they expected the match to be as big as it was. And one thing that always brings me back to WrestleMania is the spectacle. This match is the most pro wrestling match there is, and the funniest part is the action itself wasn't that memorable. What was memorable was the showmanship and dedication to telling the story of a current generation icon. This icon has broken records and climbed the heights that his past fellow wrestlers wouldn't comprehend, but once the bell rang, he was there with an immortal legend. A legend of the highest order. Sure, he's wearing black and white now, selling his soul and turning his back on his morals, but when pushed to the wall and at despair, the black and white is all for show. It's just one of those battles. The match had insane expectations, but it met them and even surpassed them. We all might have that movie we respect too much to watch on our phone or laptop. There's movies I haven't watched in years because I want to be in the right headspace to appreciate it. In wrestling, this is one of those matches. There's something of great emotion to see Hulk Hogan forego the NWO colors and attitude during the match, all in favor of being the Hulkster again. One of the greatest live emotions felt for a wrestling match in history. You can't name 5 matches that brought more emotion to the collective than this one. I haven't watched this since I did the WrestleMania X8 review, and won't watch it until I get to it in The Rock's 2001-02 run, which I'm interested in making. It's gonna come sooner rather than later. We're just gonna say that. While the main event wasn't the main event, this did produce an iconic visual of Triple H holding 2 of the greatest wrestling belts ever. This image irritates me a bit because only 1 week later they changed the design of the main belts. Great design, by the way, but I kinda wish Rock and the others got to hold this iteration of the Undisputed Championship just once. The fallout of WrestleMania was that the NWO was dead. The program was supposed to go down in a huge way with Austin and Rock presumably teaming up against the 3 men. The original plans were for Stone Cold to lose to Scott Hall, which is insane, but you have to look at it from that time period's perspective. No Way Out was promoted with the NWO in mind. WrestleMania 18's own poster was injected with a lethal dose of poison. Big plans in motion, and I wouldn't be shocked that they intended to keep Hogan as WWF's main heel up until SummerSlam. In another world, Austin and Hogan would have happened at SummerSlam 2002 or even WrestleMania 19, but with WrestleMania past the WWF, it was time for the brand split. The brand split was going to hurt the ratings, but the roster was too stacked. It's a bit unfortunate because for as good as the brand split did, it also prevented certain matches from going down. Stone Cold leads Raw and The Rock leads SmackDown. It's funny looking at this because when you hear SmackDown versus Raw, you don't think of Austin and Rock, but that was the original intention. It's very fascinating because this assumption also leads to a hypothetical world where Triple H doesn't have that super dominant run that he did. He only held the title because similar to The Undertaker, he was trusted to hold it down. You know, he's not going to leave. The big storyline storyline in WWF at the time was Hogan's comeback story. He became the #1 guy again at the age of 49, and his run was so undeniable that Triple H's crowning moment and run only became a memory after a month. The brand split offered many opportunities to new talent, which was much harder previously. Brock Lesnar and Randy Orton debuted after WrestleMania 18, and it wasn't fully clear, but when the brand split actually set in, the attention shifted to the newer guys. Eddie Guerrero returned, Edge was getting a renewed push, and Rey Mysterio was negotiating with the WWF. But there was one major thing that changed everything for the World Wrestling Federation. Dating back to the 80s, the Worldwide Life Fund had an agreement with the World Wrestling Federation to limit the use of the initials WWF internationally. So WWF could be used in the US, but internationally it's for that big panda. They violated the terms and started using WWF more. 1994 was a year where the dispute was taken to court and it continued to intensify. When the Attitude Era began, the logo was changed to the scratch one, and so did WWF's rampant use of the initials. It was a touchy dispute in the UK. You would hear World Wrestling Federation less often. The website was called WWF.com and heavily promoted, and funny enough, there was a time where the WWF Wrestling Company used to appease the panda. Look at this logo. It's so strange, but this was how they tried to avoid conflict. The block logo looked more like the WF, whereas this one was the WWF. The name WWFE was trademarked, and towards the end of 2000, World Wrestling Federation Entertainment was an official name of the company. Right before WrestleMania 18, the UK courts rejected the World Wrestling Federation's appeals on numerous occasions, and thus they trademarked the terms WWE and World Wrestling Entertainment around the end of April 2002. Well, actually, that's what I thought initially. Now, I'm not David Otunga, but I searched through trademarks and found that the logo and name WWE were filed on April 4th, 2002, or at least the application began. So you could say that they started to get the F out officially on April 4th, 2002. As a whole, this time period evokes a smile from me. The roster was insanely stacked, and you had some of the best talent in their final stretch. Rock was going crazy in-ring, but as a character was at his weakest in 4 years. Still though, I love this version of Rock. Triple H had some novelty to him upon his return. Kurt Angle, RVD, Edge, and the rest of the mid-card were putting their work boots on. It's a very colorful time and a not so great time financially for the WWF. Alright, what'd you guys think of this time period? Please comment down below, and that's for this video. Make sure you hit the rock bottom on the like button, or perhaps the Stone Cold Stunner on the subscribe button. Peace. I'm out.